The northern winter arrived with a quiet that felt heavier than sound. For Viking families living in the far reaches of Scandinavia, the season was not simply a shift in weather. It was the point where daylight thinned, warmth retreated, and survival hinged on choices made long before the first snow settled. When the cold tightened around their small settlements, they faced months where the sun rose low and left quickly, and the temperature inside their homes could fall nearly as sharply as the world outside. Without indoor fireplaces, their challenge was different from most societies living in cold climates. They had neither the open hearths that warmed distant European households nor the stone chimneys that appeared centuries later. Inside a Viking longhouse, fire was more than a source of heat. It was a risk, a companion, and a constant negotiation. Sparks could leap. Smoke could choke. A single mistake in the dead of winter could take lives and the shelter they depended on. The longhouse had to do most of the work. Built low and narrow, its thick turf walls formed a barrier against the wind. Families gathered close to its center, where smoke from the cooking fire drifted slowly toward a small opening in the roof. The air inside was warm only in a narrow band around the flames, and sharply cold everywhere else. Those who lived here learned to measure comfort in small increments. A warm meal, a dry cloak. The shared body heat of those sleeping beside you. Winter asked constant questions. How much food would last until spring? How many tools would fail in the cold? Could livestock survive inside cramped shelters without fresh pasture or ground free from frost? Every day required management of what remained. Every night forced them to trust that the structure around them could hold steady. Yet, despite these conditions, communities did not simply endure. They adapted with a patience shaped by generations. They used layered clothing made from wool that trapped heat even when damp. They slept on raised wooden platforms covered in furs. They relied on stored fish, cured meat, and grains tucked away in barrels and clay-lined pits. Their world was difficult, but it was not bleak. Families talked, repaired equipment, played games, told stories, and waited together for the slow return of light. Archaeological finds reveal how carefully they planned for this season. Settlement layouts favored shelter over openness. Hearths were designed for efficiency rather than intensity. Even small details, the way smoke holes were shaped, the way benches lined the interior walls, reveal an understanding of winter that was precise and hard-earned. What makes their resilience compelling is not just the physical strength required to withstand months of cold. It is the discipline of preparation, the acceptance of hardship, and the quiet confidence that winter, no matter how long, would eventually break. How did they learn to survive a climate that pushed them to their limits every year? And what can their methods teach us about human endurance in the face of unforgiving environments? The first snowfall often came quietly across the northern coastline, settling over long stretches of open fields, rocky inlets, and forests dense enough to mute even the strongest wind. For the Vikings who lived in these remote regions, this moment marked the slow transition into a season that demanded caution, planning, and discipline. By the time the ground turned rigid and the sea formed ice along the shallows, families already understood that they were entering months defined by endurance rather than motion. In the far north, winter daylight narrowed into a narrow ribbon between morning and night. Hours of darkness grew longer and pushed daily routines into the boundaries of what the limited light could support. The cold was not simply a temperature. It was an atmosphere that pressed into walls, slipped through wood, and settled around anyone who lingered too long away from a heat source. Without modern insulation or the comfort of dedicated indoor fireplaces, Viking households managed warmth through architecture, cooperation, and careful use of their limited fuel. The longhouse stood at the center of this planning. Often stretching more than 50 feet in length, it anchored the settlement and served as both living space and protective shell. Built from overlapping timbers and covered with turf, the structure looked almost like an extension of the land itself. Its walls were thick, its roof low, and its entrances small. Each detail reflected a purpose. A tight building trapped more heat. A low ceiling kept warm air from rising too far. Turf insulation blocked the wind better than bare wood. Inside, the air shifted between the smell of smoke, The earthy scent of packed dirt and the warmth of bodies gathered close together. The main fire sat near the center of the building. Although it was used for cooking and limited warmth, it was never allowed to grow without control. Without proper chimneys, smoke drifted upward through a vent in the roof, which had to be adjusted in different weather conditions. On mild days, it could be opened wider. During storms, it had to be kept narrow. Some days, smoke lingered inside longer than anyone wanted, and families learned to work around the discomfort. The longhouse was arranged around this core. Benches along the walls doubled as sleeping platforms. Storage baskets and chests filled the gaps. Tools hung from beams. Everything had a place because space was both valuable and shared by many. During winter, livestock were sometimes brought into smaller attached buildings or interior partitions to protect them from the cold. The warmth from animals, though modest, was another layer of heat in a world where every advantage mattered. Daily life at this time of year depended heavily on routines established during the warmer months. Hunting and fishing slowed sharply. Harvested crops from the previous season, salted fish, dried meat, and stored grains became the basis of most meals. Water was drawn from nearby sources before deep freezes made access difficult, and snow was melted only when necessary because it consumed fuel. Firewood was rationed carefully. The community tracked every bundle with an awareness that mistakes in early winter would become hardships in late winter. Inside the longhouse, actions were deliberate. Mornings began slowly as people woke to cold air around them. Clothing made from layered wool and fur was essential. It protected the body even when moisture crept into the fabric. Children stayed close to adults who managed the fire, prepared meals, or worked on small repairs. Carving tools, mending nets, patching clothing, and preparing equipment for the next year kept hands busy. These tasks filled hours that would have otherwise passed idly, and they kept families focused on the season ahead rather than the discomfort of the present. The atmosphere inside was shaped as much by conversation as by necessity. Stories passed from one generation to the next. Plans were discussed. Community decisions were made within these walls while the wind pressed against the exterior. The lack of strong indoor heat changed the pace of life but did not diminish its complexity. Instead, it encouraged a kind of shared rhythm. People stayed close, observed one another, and relied on cooperation more strongly than at any other time of year. Travel outside the settlement became limited. Paths that were easy to cross in summer required caution in winter. Frozen ground and hidden hazards made even short distances dangerous without proper preparation. Snowstorms could move quickly, and returning home before visibility dropped was a constant concern. The settlement itself functioned like a single organism during this season, with each household connected through shared knowledge and responsibility. The Arctic winter was long, and its challenges were not solved by strength alone. They required planning before the season arrived, discipline throughout it, and a deep understanding of the environment. For Viking communities, this understanding was not optional. It was learned through experience, passed down through instruction, and reinforced by the reality that failure could shape the fate of the entire family. Yet these months were not defined solely by hardship. They also held moments of calm. The glow of the central fire cast warm light across the interior. The sound of tools and quiet conversation filled the longhouse. Snow outside reflected what little daylight existed and sometimes brightened the room more than expected. Even in the darkest weeks, there was a sense of continuity. Winter was harsh, but it was not unfamiliar. Each year followed a pattern, and each family followed the practices that had allowed their ancestors to survive the same season. By living in a place with such demanding weather, the Vikings developed a relationship with winter that was practical rather than fearful. They respected its force, adapted to its limitations, and recognized that preparation was their strongest defense. As the season deepened, small adjustments inside the longhouse made the difference between discomfort and genuine danger. The long Arctic winter shaped their routines, expectations, and overall worldview. It asked for caution but rewarded foresight. It challenged their structures but also demonstrated their effectiveness. Above all, it held them close to the environment and to each other, creating a pattern of life that remained stable even when the cold tightened its grip. When the earliest hints of spring finally appeared, families emerged from months of close living with renewed energy. But during winter, every action, choice, and daily rhythm reflected one guiding goal: to endure until the world outside softened once again. Long before the first longhouses rose on the northern coastline, the Arctic climate had already shaped the way people thought about shelter and survival. Generations of trial and error taught them what worked, what failed, and what could never be risked twice. By the time the Viking Age began, the knowledge of winter living was already deep, and communities in the far north had built entire systems around it. The settlements were placed with clear intention. Villages stood close to reliable water sources, often along fjords or sheltered coves where strong winds softened and fishing remained possible for part of the year. Even in winter, these locations held strategic value. Ice formed differently in moving water, sometimes allowing access for fishing through cracks and thinner patches. The surrounding hills and forests provided protection from storms and offered the resources needed for building, heating, and repairs. A typical settlement included several longhouses arranged in a loose cluster, with smaller buildings for animals, storage, and workshops positioned nearby. Each structure faced away from the harshest winter winds. This arrangement was not accidental. It reduced the strain on the walls and allowed snow to pile naturally into protective drifts that helped insulate the buildings. The settlement worked almost like a shield, with every structure supporting the others. The longhouse stood at the center, both physically and socially. These buildings varied in size, but most followed the same shape: long, rectangular, and slightly curved at the edges. The roof was supported by a line of sturdy posts that divided the interior into two halves. The spaces along the walls served as sleeping and working areas, while the central aisle remained open for movement, fire maintenance, and daily tasks. The craftsmanship behind these structures showed an understanding of winter that came from centuries of experience. Walls were built from overlapping planks or wattle and daub techniques, then covered with turf blocks several inches thick. Turf was abundant, easy to shape, and provided insulation that outperformed raw timber. The roof, also covered in turf, blended the building with the landscape and created a natural barrier against heat loss. Doors were small, sometimes requiring a person to stoop when entering. This helped keep cold air from rushing inside. Entrances were usually placed on the side least exposed to wind. Some longhouses included a small, cold room or entry space where snow-covered cloaks could be shaken off before people moved deeper inside. These details helped control the interior climate at a time when even small improvements mattered. Communities also shaped their environment beyond the settlement itself. Paths between buildings were cleared early in the season to prevent heavy snow from hardening into uneven ice. Wood piles were stacked carefully under angled roofs to keep them dry. Tools for hunting, fishing, and gathering were stored in places where they could be reached quickly if the weather shifted. Everything was arranged with the knowledge that winter rarely provided second chances. Social structure played a role in survival as well. Households often included extended family, parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes hired laborers or dependents. This created a steady flow of shared work. Tasks were divided by skill and strength, and winter demanded every pair of hands. Older family members tended smaller chores, mended clothing, or shaped wooden utensils, while younger adults managed the heavier responsibilities. Children learned by watching and participating in safe tasks, building knowledge that would serve them later in life. Community cooperation extended beyond individual households. Large repairs, critical hunts, and shared food stores were often distributed based on need rather than strict ownership. During winter, the line between generosity and survival could be thin. A family that struggled one season might be the one lending support the next. Because the climate was harsh and unpredictable, every settlement depended on collective resilience. Historical evidence suggests that winter gatherings were common. People visited neighboring longhouses not only to share news but to exchange labor and maintain bonds within the community. These small interactions played an important role in managing the emotional strain of long, dark months. They reinforced trust and created a support system that kept the community stable during times when the environment pressed hardest against them. Inside the settlement, the landscape transformed into a series of zones with specific uses. Some areas were reserved for firewood collection during early winter. Others served as paths to fishing spots or hunting grounds for small game. The surrounding forests, although quiet during this season, remained a vital resource. Fallen branches, dried bark, and dead trunks were gathered in small quantities to extend firewood supplies. People learned not to overharvest, understanding that careless gathering in one winter would create shortages in the next. Snow also shaped how people moved through the environment. Frozen ground made travel quicker but more dangerous. Thick snow concealed both safe paths and hidden risks. Families relied on established routes marked by stones, trees, or the natural shape of the terrain. A wrong turn in heavy snowfall could disorient even experienced travelers. For this reason, most movement became deliberate, planned, and kept as brief as possible. Though winter demanded caution, it also created predictable patterns. Every stage of the season brought different challenges. Early winter meant adjusting to the cold and finalizing storage. Midwinter asked for careful rationing, steady maintenance, and limited travel. Late winter created new tension as supplies ran low and storms remained possible. These rhythms were understood well enough that each household prepared for them long before the season began. Despite the weight of the season, Viking settlements were not silent. The sound of work continued inside longhouses. Hammers shaped iron tools, women spun wool, and children carved small wooden toys. Storytelling filled the darker hours. The mix of practical and personal routines kept spirits steady and created continuity even when the world outside lay frozen. This historical context reveals a simple truth. Viking survival in Arctic winters was not the result of a single method or invention. It was the outcome of a system built around planning, cooperation, architecture, and respect for the land. Their techniques did not eliminate hardship, but they made survival possible in a climate that offered little margin for error. When viewed through this lens, the longhouse becomes more than a building. It becomes a symbol of collective knowledge, shaped by generations who learned to read the seasons, adapt to their limitations, and maintain life through the harshest months of the year. Inside a Viking longhouse, warmth was never guaranteed. It had to be managed, guarded, and shared. Unlike later medieval homes built around stone hearths and fully enclosed chimneys, Viking structures relied on a simpler system, a central fire on the floor with no dedicated fireplace built into the walls. This setup worked, but it required discipline and a deep understanding of how smoke, heat, and airflow behaved inside a closed space during Arctic winters. The fire itself sat in a shallow pit along the center aisle of the longhouse. It was placed there for several reasons. Heat rose straight upward, warming the ridge of the roof, while the long, narrow shape of the building helped distribute some warmth along the length of the interior. The central position also reduced the risk of walls catching fire, since turf and wooden planks were vulnerable if flames grew too large or sparks drifted too far. Above the fire, a smoke hole in the roof allowed fumes to escape. It wasn't a chimney, and it didn't create strong upward pull like a modern flue. Instead, it worked through slow ventilation. When the fire burned low and steady, smoke drifted upward, slipped past the beams, and escaped through the opening. In calm weather, the system worked fairly well, but strong winds or heavy snowfall could change everything. Families monitored the smoke hole constantly. In storms, wind pushed smoke back inside, filling the room with a thick haze that stung eyes and forced people to crouch low where the air was clearer. Sometimes the hole had to be narrowed with a covering of wood or hide, which reduced ventilation even more. This made fires tricky to maintain. Too much flame filled the house with smoke. Too little flame failed to heat the space at all. Managing the fire was a skill, not a simple task. The structure of the longhouse helped compensate for these challenges. Thick turf walls and a heavily insulated roof trapped heat inside. Over time, the interior air grew warm enough that even a modest fire could maintain a stable temperature in the main living area. This design choice shows how Vikings balanced available resources with the demands of a northern climate. Even so, the longhouse never became fully warm in the way modern homes do. People lived with layers, clothing, blankets, shared sleeping spaces, and the radiating heat of bodies moving around the room. The goal was not comfort in the modern sense. The goal was survival. Heat also came from an unexpected source: livestock. In some settlements, a section of the longhouse or an attached building housed sheep, goats, and sometimes cattle during the coldest months. Their body heat raised the temperature of the structure slightly, and keeping them indoors protected them from blizzards, predators, and freezing winds. This arrangement required careful cleaning and regular airflow to avoid unhealthy conditions, but it provided warmth that might otherwise have been lost. Cooking took place over the central fire. Pots hung from wooden hooks or rested on stones arranged to support them. Meals were prepared with ingredients that stored well through winter barley, dried fish, salted meat, and preserved vegetables. Boiling pots helped warm the interior air, though they also added humidity. Too much moisture created condensation on walls and beams, which could freeze in deep cold or encourage rot later in the season. Managing humidity became another part of household routine. Lighting was another factor. Because the smoke hole released warm air continuously, daylight helped reduce the need for stronger fires during morning hours. Windows were limited, usually no more than narrow slits covered with oiled animal membranes to block drafts while allowing some light to pass through. These small openings reduced heat loss but offered only faint illumination. As a result, firelight became the main source of visibility inside. This firelight did more than brighten the room. It shaped the atmosphere of winter life. Shadows moved across the beams. Warm tones flickered on the walls. Conversations unfolded in the glow of embers. People worked with quiet focus, careful to keep sparks from catching on clothing or bedding. The central fire was not simply a tool, it became the heart of the home. Because there was no fireplace structure to contain flames, safety routines were strict. Children were taught early how close they could sit. Adults kept buckets of water or snow nearby during dry spells. Ashes were cleared regularly and stored safely until they cooled completely. Larger settlements occasionally had a recognized elder or council who mediated disputes, coordinated resource distribution, and oversaw cooperative projects. Decisions about communal hunting, fishing rights, or emergency responses were guided by these individuals. Authority was practical and functional, rather than symbolic or hierarchical. Respect was earned through experience, wisdom, and demonstrated ability to lead in survival situations. Conflict within households or communities was usually pragmatic rather than violent. Disagreements often concerned resource allocation or labor duties. Resolution required negotiation, compromise, and, when necessary, enforcement by household heads. The ever-present threat of environmental hardship discouraged unnecessary disputes, fostering a culture where cooperation and strategic thinking were valued over personal ego. Gender roles, while defined, were adaptable during crisis periods. If a man fell ill or could not perform physically demanding tasks, women stepped in to complete necessary work. Similarly, older children or adolescents often assumed responsibilities normally reserved for adults. Survival dictated flexibility. Each member's contribution, regardless of traditional role, was essential for the household and community to endure. The extended network of households also functioned as a support system for emergencies. In the event of injury, illness, or equipment failure, neighboring families provided assistance. Shared knowledge of medicinal herbs, basic first aid, and remedies for frostbite or hypothermia ensured that no individual household faced winter challenges entirely alone. Cooperation became a survival strategy embedded in daily life. The distribution of labor followed seasonal rhythms. During the early winter, activities focused on preparation, securing food, stacking firewood, and reinforcing shelter. Midwinter required careful rationing, constant maintenance of fires, and tending animals. Late winter emphasized scouting ice conditions, preparing tools for spring, and planning for planting or hunting as soon as daylight returned. Social structure provided a framework to organize these activities efficiently, ensuring that essential tasks were completed despite limited energy and extreme cold. Longhouse layouts supported social dynamics. Sleeping platforms along walls allowed families to share warmth while maintaining some personal space. Central aisles facilitated movement, work, and social interaction. Communal meals were not only a necessity for survival, but also reinforced social bonds, allowing families to gather, exchange information, and maintain morale. In conclusion, the survival of Vikings in Arctic winters without indoor fireplaces depended heavily on social structure and community organization. Individual skill, while important, was insufficient alone. Success relied on intergenerational households, clear leadership, cooperation among neighboring families, and adaptive flexibility within defined roles. Social cohesion transformed environmental hardship from a purely physical challenge into a manageable communal endeavor. Every interaction, task, and decision was shaped by the shared objective, enduring winter together, with each household and settlement functioning as a cohesive system capable of weathering the coldest months of the year. Viking survival in the Arctic was not accidental. It was the result of centuries of technological and cultural innovations designed to endure extreme cold, limited daylight, and scarce resources. These innovations spanned building techniques, clothing, tools, and social practices that all worked in concert to sustain life during months when warmth and food were scarce. Without modern heating or indoor fireplaces, Vikings relied on clever solutions that balanced functionality, resource availability, and safety. One of the most important innovations was the construction of the longhouse itself. The longhouse was engineered to maximize insulation and retain heat from a single, centrally located fire. Thick walls made of overlapping timber planks, turf, or wattle and daub created an effective barrier against the Arctic wind. The roof, also layered with turf, prevented heat from escaping while providing additional protection against snow and rain. Builders had refined these methods over generations, learning how to orient buildings, seal gaps, and position doors and windows strategically to minimize drafts. Even the smallest details, such as the placement of sleeping platforms above the floor, reflected practical understanding of heat distribution. Beyond architecture, clothing, and textiles were central innovations. Wool was the preferred material for tunics, leggings, and cloaks because of its warmth and moisture resistance. Vikings mastered layering. Multiple garments trapped air between layers, significantly increasing insulation. Furs were worn during the coldest periods or used as bedding to create heated sleeping areas. Skilled weaving and felting techniques ensured that these materials lasted through repeated use in harsh conditions. Clothing was not merely functional. It was essential. Technology for survival, food preservation techniques also demonstrated innovative thinking. Drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting allowed communities to stockpile resources before winter. Fish and meat, especially, were preserved to last months without spoiling. Root vegetables, such as turnips and carrots, were stored in insulated pits or buried under straw, a method that kept them from freezing solid. These techniques required foresight, careful preparation, and precise knowledge of the local climate to prevent spoilage or waste. Vikings developed practical tools specifically adapted for Arctic life. Knives, axes, and small saws were multipurpose, useful for chopping wood, preparing food, and building shelters. Iron tools were sharpened and maintained to last long periods without repair, reflecting an understanding of resource scarcity. For cooking, iron cauldrons and clay pots were designed to sit over small, manageable fires, maximizing heat distribution while minimizing fuel consumption. Even small wooden implements, such as tongs, paddles, and hooks, were crafted to extend functionality and reduce the strain of repetitive tasks. Another critical innovation was the use of animals for heat and utility. Livestock were often housed within or adjacent to longhouses, providing both protection for the animals and additional warmth for humans. This practice required careful planning and hygiene management, ensuring that heat from animals could be shared without compromising living conditions. The strategic placement of animals reflects an integrated understanding of environmental engineering and resource management. Vikings also developed cultural practices that indirectly enhanced survival. Social routines such as communal fire tending, collective meal preparation, and shared labor created efficiencies that reduced energy expenditure and preserved essential resources. Knowledge transfer within families and communities ensured that younger generations learned essential skills early. Storytelling, rituals, and seasonal ceremonies reinforced social cohesion, which was vital during long periods of isolation when morale could otherwise falter. Lighting innovations were equally practical. Small window slits, sometimes covered with oiled animal membranes, allowed natural light to enter while reducing heat loss. Oil lamps or small fires were used strategically, providing visibility without consuming excessive fuel. Even the smoke management system, a simple roof hole above the fire, demonstrated an understanding of ventilation and indoor air quality. Controlling smoke while maintaining warmth required careful monitoring, timing, and skill, which were passed down from one generation to the next. Transportation tools and clothing adaptations allowed Vikings to continue essential winter activities. Snowshoes, sleds, and skis enabled hunting, fishing, and resource gathering even in deep snow. Fur-lined boots and mittens ensured mobility without sacrificing dexterity or warmth. Every piece of technology, whether simple or complex, had been refined to meet the environmental demands of Arctic living. Cultural innovations complemented technological advances. Winter routines were structured to align with natural light, temperature fluctuations, and seasonal cycles. Tasks such as food rationing, wood chopping, and animal care followed precise schedules, reducing waste and maximizing efficiency. Festivals and communal gatherings provided psychological reinforcement, maintaining morale during the darkest months. These cultural habits were as critical to survival as architecture or tools. They ensured that knowledge, practices, and social cohesion persisted. Across generations, the integration of technology and culture is evident in the management of indoor climate. Without fireplaces, Vikings relied on a combination of insulated structures, layered clothing, shared body heat, and disciplined fire use to maintain habitable conditions. Their innovations demonstrate an acute understanding of physics, materials, and biology, even if expressed through practical, hands-on knowledge rather than formal science. Each design choice and cultural practice addressed a specific survival challenge, from conserving heat to minimizing fuel consumption. Ultimately, Viking technological and cultural innovations reveal a sophisticated response to one of the harshest climates in Europe. Survival was not the result of luck, but of careful planning, shared knowledge, and adaptive ingenuity. The interplay between architecture, clothing, food management, tools, animal husbandry, and social organization created a system capable of sustaining life through months of darkness, sub-zero temperatures, and frequent storms. These innovations, though developed centuries ago, offer insight into human resilience and the capacity for communities to thrive even under extreme environmental pressures. Surviving Arctic winters without indoor fireplaces required the Vikings to develop and refine a variety of strategies that combined careful planning, resource management, and adaptive problem solving. These strategies were deeply practical, born out of generations of living in one of Europe's most extreme climates. Every element of daily life, from food storage to fire management, was designed to address specific survival challenges, and the cumulative effect of these strategies enabled Viking communities to endure months of sub-zero temperatures and darkness. One primary strategy was the careful management of heat within the longhouse. A central fire, while modest compared to later fireplaces, became the focus of daily life. Families learned to control flame size, fuel type, and placement to maintain warmth efficiently. Large logs provided long-lasting heat but required careful tending, while smaller branches could be added incrementally to maintain a steady temperature. Fire management became a learned skill, passed from adults to children as part of their preparation for winter survival. Layering and insulation were equally essential. Vikings wore multiple layers of wool, linen, and fur, which trapped air and retained body heat. Bedding and sleeping platforms were raised above the floor and layered with furs and straw, creating insulated sleeping areas. Even minor adjustments, such as moving closer together at night or arranging bedding near the fire, contributed to warmth. These methods reflect a systematic understanding of thermodynamics applied through observation and experience rather than formal study. Food management was another area where strategy played a central role. Preparation for winter began months in advance, with families preserving meat, fish, and vegetables using drying, salting, and smoking techniques. During winter, small rations were distributed daily to avoid spoilage and ensure a consistent food supply. Root vegetables stored in insulated pits provided supplemental nutrition, while careful monitoring of ice thickness on stored water prevented critical shortages. Food strategies minimized risk while maximizing caloric intake necessary. For survival in cold conditions, social cooperation served as both a strategy and a safety net. Families worked together to gather firewood, care for livestock, and repair shelter. Neighboring households exchanged resources, assisted with large tasks, and shared knowledge. These cooperative networks ensured that no single family faced winter's challenges entirely alone. Decisions about labor allocation, rationing, and emergency response were guided by consensus and practical leadership, reinforcing social cohesion while maintaining resilience. Adaptive use of the environment also played a role. Vikings understood local geography, wind patterns, and seasonal changes. Longhouses were often sited to protect against prevailing winds, and natural materials such as turf and stone were utilized for insulation. Snow itself was used strategically, packed around structures or livestock pens to add extra protection. Even the careful storage of fuel and food accounted for natural hazards such as blizzards, frost, and ice accumulation. Hygiene and health strategies were crucial as well. Cold, damp conditions could easily lead to illness. Families maintained cleanliness within the longhouse, ventilated smoke, and ensured that clothing and bedding stayed dry whenever possible. Simple remedies for frostbite, minor injuries, and common illnesses were part of the communal knowledge base. Ensuring individual health was essential to overall survival, as incapacitated members could jeopardize the household's ability to function effectively. Psychological resilience was another strategy embedded in daily routines. Long Arctic nights tested morale, but structured activities such as storytelling, communal meals, and simple games helped maintain focus and mental stability. Maintaining morale was critical, because the ability to carry out essential survival tasks depended on both physical and emotional stamina. Culture, tradition, and shared experience became tools for endurance, reinforcing determination when the environment offered little comfort. Livestock management was adapted as a survival strategy. Animals provided both food and warmth, but caring for them during extreme cold required ingenuity. Shelters were reinforced, bedding was layered for insulation, and routines were established for feeding and monitoring the animals. By integrating animals into daily life rather than isolating them outdoors, Vikings maximized resources while reducing energy loss. Transportation and mobility were strategically planned. Snow and ice limited access to hunting and resource gathering areas, so equipment such as sleds, skis, and snowshoes allowed people to reach essential locations efficiently. Routes were chosen for safety, speed, and minimal exposure to wind and cold. These logistical strategies minimized the physical toll of traveling in harsh conditions, allowing communities to maintain food supplies and communication even in deep winter. Risk management underpinned every decision. Fire control, food rationing, clothing layers, shelter construction, and labor distribution all reflected careful assessment of potential hazards. Vikings understood that miscalculations could lead to frostbite, hunger, or structural failure. Their strategies were iterative, improving over generations as families learned from successes and failures. Survival was not left to chance. It was the result of deliberate, informed planning and disciplined execution. Ultimately, the Viking strategies were holistic. They integrated technology, social organization, environmental understanding, and cultural practices into a coherent system of survival. Fires were managed with knowledge of airflow and fuel efficiency. Clothing and bedding were layered and insulated. Food was preserved, rationed, and strategically stored. Social networks reinforced collective resilience. Mental and physical health was maintained through routines and cultural practices. Every element addressed a specific challenge, yet each was interconnected with the others, creating a self-reinforcing system that allowed life to continue despite Arctic extremes. By combining careful preparation, adaptive problem-solving, and collective effort, Viking communities overcame the challenges posed by long, cold winters without indoor fireplaces. Their strategies reveal an intricate balance of ingenuity, observation, and cultural continuity. Survival in the Arctic was not accidental, it was the result of generations of learning, experimentation, and adaptation, forming a blueprint of resilience that allowed communities to thrive where few others could. Even in a harsh Arctic environment, Viking communities experienced moments that shaped their ability to survive and adapt to long, cold winters. These significant events and turning points were not always dramatic in the traditional sense of battles or political upheaval. Many were subtle, practical developments, discoveries, innovations, or social shifts that transformed daily life, resource management, and long-term survival strategies. One critical turning point occurred with the refinement of longhouse construction. Early versions of the longhouse were simple wooden structures, often exposed to wind and cold and poorly insulated. Over generations, builders experimented with layering timber, wattle and daub, and turf, learning through trial and error which combinations retained warmth most efficiently. The addition of the central fire pit, coupled with smoke ventilation through roof holes, became a defining feature. Each incremental improvement allowed families to endure longer periods indoors without succumbing to cold or smoke inhalation. This architectural evolution marked a decisive step in the Vikings' capacity to inhabit Arctic regions successfully. Another significant development was the optimization of food preservation techniques. While early communities struggled with winter shortages, generations of experimentation with drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting fish and meat gradually created dependable winter provisions. Discovering the benefits of insulated root cellars and underground storage pits for vegetables enabled families to maintain nutrition even during months when the ground outside was frozen solid. These innovations were turning points because they fundamentally reduced winter mortality and enabled settlements to plan for long-term stability rather than short-term survival. Social adaptations also played a pivotal role. Communities gradually recognized the importance of cooperative networks, both within the longhouse and among neighboring households. Sharing resources, distributing labor, and coordinating firewood and food collection were strategies that became formalized over time. The shift from isolated family survival toward inter-household cooperation marked a turning point in social resilience. Communities that embraced collaboration fared better during harsh winters, as they could collectively overcome emergencies such as food shortages, livestock loss, or storm damage. The management of livestock within or adjacent to longhouses represented another crucial adaptation. Earlier practices had placed animals in separate pens, exposing them to the worst of winter weather. Through observation, Vikings realized that bringing animals closer to living spaces provided shared heat, reduced risk of predation, and ensured more reliable access to food. While this required vigilance to maintain hygiene and prevent disease, it offered a decisive advantage in sustaining both human and animal life throughout the season. Technological improvements in tools and clothing were also turning points. Innovations in wool processing, felting, and layering allowed clothing to become more insulating and durable. Iron tools, cooking implements, and household implements were adapted for efficiency, longevity, and multiple uses. These developments reduced labor, conserved energy, and minimized exposure to the elements, directly impacting survival rates. Each refinement represented a small but cumulative turning point in the capacity of individuals and households to thrive despite environmental challenges. Winter routines themselves became structured turning points in annual life cycles. Generations of observation taught families the optimal timing for tasks such as firewood collection, food preparation, clothing repair, and livestock care. Missing these windows often had serious consequences, while executing them successfully allowed communities to endure the coldest months. Over time, these routines were codified into cultural practices, blending practical survival strategies with social rituals that reinforced community cohesion. Health-related discoveries also contributed to turning points. Vikings learned which plants and simple remedies could treat frostbite, minor wounds, and respiratory issues common in cold, damp environments. Recognizing the importance of hygiene, ventilation, and clean bedding prevented the spread of illness. During months when medical resources were limited, knowledge passed down through families became a critical determinant of survival, creating a legacy that influenced subsequent generations. Finally, environmental adaptation was a key turning point. Communities learned to site longhouses strategically, taking advantage of natural windbreaks, sun exposure, and proximity to resources such as water, forests, and hunting grounds. Seasonal awareness and weather observation allowed families to anticipate storms, allocate resources more effectively, and adjust daily routines for maximum safety and efficiency. The ability to read environmental signals and respond proactively became an essential survival skill, shaping the overall resilience of Viking settlements. Collectively, these events and adaptations transformed Viking life in Arctic regions. Each turning point: architectural innovation, food preservation, social cooperation, livestock management, technological improvements, structured routines, health practices, and environmental adaptation interacted with others to form an integrated system of survival. The cumulative effect of these developments enabled communities to persist in an environment that would have overwhelmed less organized or less adaptive societies. By focusing on practical challenges and iterative improvements rather than dramatic, singular events, we gain insight into how Vikings endured long winters without indoor fireplaces. Survival was not the result of chance but of careful observation, learned experience, and shared knowledge applied systematically over generations. Each turning point represented a step forward in the ongoing effort to reconcile human life with one of Europe's most unforgiving climates, creating a blueprint of resilience that defined Arctic Viking communities for centuries. Our understanding of how Vikings survived Arctic winters without indoor fireplaces is supported by extensive archaeological findings and historical records. Excavations of longhouses, burial sites, storage pits, and artifacts reveal tangible evidence of survival strategies, architectural innovations, and daily routines adapted to extreme cold. These discoveries provide a factual framework that illustrates how communities coped with long periods of darkness, sub-zero temperatures, and limited resources. Longhouses themselves are among the most significant sources of evidence. Archaeologists have unearthed foundations of timber-framed structures, often up to 30 meters long, with carefully layered walls of wood, wattle and daub, or turf. The layout consistently shows central hearths or fire pits, with raised sleeping platforms along the walls. Analysis of soot deposits and ventilation patterns in these sites confirms that the hearths were used strategically for heat rather than full-scale cooking, reflecting an understanding of fire management without indoor fireplaces. These structural features demonstrate intentional design for insulation, air circulation, and heat retention. Storage pits and root cellars provide further evidence of winter preparedness. Excavations in northern Viking settlements reveal underground pits lined with straw or stones, used to store vegetables, grains, and other perishable goods. Carbon dating and residue analysis confirm that these pits maintained relatively stable temperatures, preventing freezing and spoilage. The presence of preserved plant remains, including turnips, carrots, and cabbage, shows careful selection of hardy crops and demonstrates the importance of strategic food storage. Artifacts related to clothing and textiles illustrate adaptation to cold conditions. Woolen garments, often layered or felled for durability, have been recovered from burial sites, some exceptionally well preserved due to the cold and dry environment. These finds indicate advanced knowledge of insulation and layering techniques. Fur-lined clothing, gloves, and boots were essential for mobility and warmth, with evidence of careful craftsmanship ensuring both functionality and longevity. Tools, and household implements also shed light on survival strategies. Iron knives, axes, and cooking vessels were designed for multi-purpose use, often showing wear patterns consistent with chopping wood, processing food, and repairing structures. Wooden paddles, tongs, and sled components provide evidence of ingenuity in managing both daily chores and transportation under harsh winter conditions. Archaeological findings of small iron cauldrons and clay pots suggest that cooking fires were small, efficient, and carefully controlled to conserve fuel while maintaining warmth. Animal husbandry practices are visible in both archaeological remains and settlement layouts. Excavated longhouses often reveal adjacent or integrated livestock pens, suggesting that animals contributed heat and sustenance during the winter. Bone analysis indicates that livestock were fed stored fodder, demonstrating planning and foresight. The presence of young and adult animals together also points to strategies aimed at maintaining herd survival during extreme cold, which in turn supported human nutrition and warmth. Historical records, including sagas and chronicles, corroborate archaeological evidence. Accounts describe longhouses as communal spaces, central fires as vital for warmth, and social routines that involved collective effort to survive winter months. These sources also document winter diets, including preserved fish and meat, root, vegetables, and dairy products, providing context to the physical evidence of storage pits and preserved food. Written records emphasize cooperation, planning, and knowledge transmission. Aligning with patterns seen in excavated sites, evidence of daily life practices reinforces the integration of social and technological strategies, tools for spinning. Wool, weaving, and felting indicate that communities produced clothing suited to layered insulation. Items such as sleeping mats, furs, and bedding remnants confirm that raised platforms and insulated sleeping arrangements were standard practice. In some sites, traces of heated stones or hearth-adjacent bedding show methods used to maintain warmth without full-scale fireplaces. At Ion Ally. Pollen and soil analyses around settlements provide insight into resource management. Signs of controlled vegetation clearing, wood gathering, and grazing patterns suggest strategic use of the surrounding environment. These environmental adaptations reflect a sophisticated understanding of local geography and seasonal changes, confirming that survival strategies were informed by careful observation and practical knowledge. Even more subtle evidence, such as soot patterns on walls, placement of sleeping platforms, and residue from cooking vessels, helps reconstruct daily routines and survival strategies. Together with skeletal remains showing diet and health conditions, these findings allow historians and archaeologists to piece together a comprehensive picture of life during Arctic winters. A combination of material culture, environmental data, and historical accounts demonstrates how Vikings effectively managed heat, nutrition, and labor to endure one of Europe's most challenging climates. In conclusion, archaeology and historical records provide robust evidence that Viking communities survived Arctic winters through a combination of structural design, food preservation, clothing innovations, animal management, and social organization. Every artifact, building remnant, and written record reflects careful adaptation to extreme conditions. Far from relying on luck, Vikings systematically applied knowledge, technology, and communal effort to ensure survival. These findings offer a grounded, factual understanding of daily life in a harsh environment, revealing both the ingenuity and resilience of Arctic Viking societies. Understanding Viking survival strategies becomes even clearer when we compare them to other groups or eras that faced similar environmental challenges. By examining different societies, both contemporaneous and from different periods, we can see how innovation, social organization, and technology intersected with climate to shape survival outcomes. These comparisons highlight both the uniqueness of the Vikings' adaptations and the universal principles of enduring extreme cold. One natural comparison is with the Inuit peoples of the Arctic regions of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska. Like the Vikings, the Inuit faced long, dark winters, extreme cold, and limited access to plant-based food. Both groups developed housing that maximized warmth, The Inuit constructed igloos or sod houses that used compacted snow or layered materials for insulation, similar to the turf and wattle used by Vikings in longhouses. Clothing strategies also converged, emphasizing layered garments and the use of fur to retain body heat. The key difference lies in resources. While Vikings had access to timber and some cultivated crops, the Inuit relied almost entirely on animal products and ice fishing, illustrating how environment shapes technological and cultural adaptations. Another comparison can be drawn with early medieval communities in northern Europe outside of Scandinavia, such as the Anglo-Saxons and Picts. These societies also faced cold winters but in less extreme Arctic conditions. Their houses were smaller, often with simpler hearth systems, and they relied more heavily on communal baking or shared village ovens to maintain warmth. Compared to Vikings, these groups sometimes had shorter winters and less pressure to innovate insulation techniques or advanced food preservation for months-long darkness. Vikings living farther north were forced to refine both architecture and social routines to survive harsher extremes, demonstrating the link between environmental stress and technological sophistication. Looking further back, Mesolithic hunter-gatherers of northern Europe provide another point of comparison. These groups endured colder climates after the last ice age, often living in temporary shelters or caves, and relied heavily on hunting and foraging. Unlike Vikings, Mesolithic communities had minimal permanent structures or livestock management, which limited their ability to sustain consistent warmth over long periods. The Vikings' permanent longhouses, communal living, and domesticated animals represent a significant advancement in adapting to winter extremes, showing how sedentism and social organization can increase survival chances. Comparisons with other Viking settlements in milder regions such as Denmark or southern Sweden also illustrate adaptation to environment. Southern communities had shorter winters, more arable land, and greater access to timber. Longhouses were often less insulated, and reliance on food preservation was less critical. These differences demonstrate how regional climate pressures influence technological and social innovations. Vikings in Arctic areas had to innovate more extensively, leading to techniques like insulated storage pits, layered clothing, and highly coordinated social routines that were less critical in milder regions. Another instructive contrast comes from Alpine or Central European communities during the medieval period. Like Arctic Vikings, they faced mountainous terrain, cold winters, and snow accumulation. Communities there developed insulated homes, thick walls, and fire management strategies, but unlike Vikings, they often had access to coal or larger centralized fireplaces earlier, reducing reliance on shared body heat or precise fire management. The Arctic Vikings' methods reflect a high degree of resource efficiency, as they could not rely on abundant fuel or large indoor fires. Comparing across eras also highlights differences in social organization. For example, Scandinavian Vikings integrated communal labor, cooperative planning, and multi-generational knowledge transfer into survival strategies. In contrast, some earlier prehistoric groups, while adept hunters or foragers, had less formalized social structures for distributing labor or sharing resources. This social dimension of Viking adaptation structured routines, collective effort, and knowledge passed from elders to youth was as important as technological innovations in ensuring survival through long winters. Additionally, examining survival strategies in other extreme climates, such as Siberian indigenous groups or Mongolian nomads, reveals convergent solutions. Both relied on layering clothing, insulated shelters, and careful management of animals for warmth and sustenance. However, the Vikings' integration of agriculture, animal husbandry, and permanent structures allowed for a level of stability and predictability in winter survival that purely nomadic groups could not achieve. The combination of sedentary living with environmental adaptation demonstrates a hybrid approach unique to Arctic Viking settlements. Even in comparison with more modern populations, Viking strategies show remarkable foresight. Before the widespread use of stoves or central heating in Europe, communities often relied on open hearths, layered clothing, and insulated sleeping areas. Vikings perfected these practices centuries earlier, indicating that necessity drove innovation in ways that modern populations, with access to fuel and technology, no longer experience. Their methods exemplify how knowledge, adaptation, and cooperation can compensate for the absence of technological conveniences. Overall, these comparisons illustrate that while many human groups have faced harsh winters, the Vikings' combination of architectural innovation, clothing, food preservation, animal management, and social cohesion was particularly well suited to the Arctic environment. The pressures of extended darkness, severe cold, and limited resources drove technological and cultural developments that were more advanced or specialized than those of contemporaneous groups in milder climates. Comparing Vikings with other societies underscores both the universality of certain survival principles: insulation, layering, social cooperation, and the distinctive ways in which Arctic conditions shaped Viking life. By examining these parallels and contrasts, we gain a richer understanding of how human ingenuity evolves in response to environmental pressures. The Vikings' survival strategies were not isolated inventions but part of a continuum of adaptation, showing both shared human problem-solving approaches and the unique solutions required by extreme Arctic winters. For Vikings enduring long Arctic winters, survival was not solely a matter of practical strategies like fire management, clothing, or food preservation. Cultural beliefs and rituals also played a vital role in sustaining communities. These practices reinforced social cohesion, offered psychological resilience, and shaped daily routines in ways that supported both physical and emotional survival. Even in the absence of indoor fireplaces, the interplay of cultural values and rituals helped individuals cope with prolonged cold, darkness, and isolation. Central to Viking cultural life was the concept of familial and communal responsibility. Elders were respected as custodians of survival knowledge, from fire management to livestock care. Their guidance ensured younger generations learned essential skills, and their authority reinforced order and cooperation during stressful winter months. Daily routines often incorporated rituals of instruction and storytelling, embedding practical lessons within culturally meaningful narratives. These gatherings were more than entertainment. They functioned as informal education and community reinforcement, creating continuity across generations. Religious and spiritual practices also shaped responses to winter hardships. Archaeological evidence and historical records show that Vikings conducted small rituals and offerings aimed at ensuring protection, health, and prosperity. Though not always grandiose, these practices reinforced a sense of control over unpredictable environmental conditions. Even modest acts, leaving offerings near the hearth or invoking blessings before hunting, helped reduce anxiety, structured the day, and symbolically connected humans to natural and spiritual forces. Such practices supported mental endurance. During long, dark periods when resources were scarce and the environment unforgiving, storytelling and oral traditions were equally important. Sagas, myths, and family histories were recited around the hearth, providing continuity and a shared cultural identity. These narratives often highlighted resourcefulness, bravery, and resilience, reinforcing community values that had immediate survival implications. By celebrating the ingenuity and endurance of ancestors, these stories motivated individuals to uphold traditions and practical skills essential for winter survival. Storytelling also offered a form of social cohesion, giving members a sense of belonging and purpose in the face of environmental stress. Rituals tied to seasonal cycles structured the daily and annual rhythms of Viking life. Winter marked a time for specific work routines, dietary adjustments, and social activities. The observation of solstices, moon phases, and environmental signals influenced the timing of communal work, food storage, and fire maintenance. Such rituals created predictability in an unpredictable environment, reducing stress and ensuring that essential survival tasks were completed in a timely manner. Integrating seasonal awareness into both practical routines and cultural observances exemplifies how belief systems supported survival outcomes, hygiene, and domestic rituals further illustrate the connection between culture and survival. Practices, such as maintaining clean hearth areas, airing bedding, and carefully storing clothing, were often reinforced by communal norms and subtle ritualistic attention. By embedding cleanliness and order into cultural expectations, Viking communities reduced the risk of illness during periods when medical remedies were limited. Cultural reinforcement of these behaviors illustrates how social values and rituals were intertwined with practical survival measures. Ritualized food practices also contributed to winter resilience. The preparation, preservation, and sharing of meals were often accompanied by communal or ceremonial aspects, such as collective feasts or ritual blessings. Even modest acknowledgments of gratitude or shared storytelling during mealtimes reinforced social bonds and distributed morale evenly across households. These rituals turned essential survival tasks into community-strengthening exercises, ensuring cooperation and coordination while supporting nutritional health. Beliefs surrounding natural elements such as the sun, wind, and seasonal changes also influenced behavioral strategies. Observing the movement of the sun and the pattern of storms was both practical and symbolic, guiding daily activities and reinforcing a worldview in which humans were part of a larger ecological system. These observations were often formalized into cultural knowledge, passed down through narratives, songs, and direct instruction, allowing individuals to respond adaptively to the environment while reinforcing a collective understanding of their world. Ceremonies for protection, including small charms or symbolic gestures, reflected the psychological necessity of coping with environmental stress. These acts, though not always linked to empirically effective outcomes, served an important role in maintaining morale, focus, and a sense of agency. By providing rituals for control and security, communities mitigated fear and anxiety, which could otherwise impair judgment and coordination, key factors in surviving extreme cold. Finally, the integration of cultural norms into everyday labor routines demonstrates the holistic nature of Viking adaptation. Tasks such as fire tending, wood chopping, and animal care were not only practical but also culturally codified. Performing them with attention, ritual acknowledgement, or communal observation transformed essential survival activities into practices imbued with meaning. This dual purpose reinforced diligence, encouraged collective participation, and supported both mental and physical resilience throughout the long winter months. In sum, Viking cultural beliefs and rituals were tightly interwoven with practical survival strategies. Storytelling, seasonal observances, spiritual practices, communal norms, and ritualized labor created an environment where social cohesion, psychological resilience, and adaptive behaviors could flourish. By embedding survival knowledge within cultural frameworks, Viking communities enhanced their ability to endure harsh Arctic winters without indoor fireplaces. These cultural practices demonstrate that survival in extreme conditions depended not only on technology or resources, but also on the values, beliefs, and rituals that structured daily life and preserved communal identity, health, and lifestyle. Was central to Viking survival in Arctic regions, where extended winters, limited resources, and sub-zero temperatures created persistent challenges. Despite lacking modern medicine, Viking communities developed strategies to maintain physical well-being, prevent illness, and adapt routines to the environment. The interplay between daily habits, diet, shelter, and communal practices shaped both individual health and the collective resilience of these settlements. Nutrition was a primary determinant of health. During long winters, fresh produce was scarce, so Vikings relied on preserved foods such as salted or smoked fish, dried meat, and stored root vegetables. Dairy products, including cheese and fermented milk, supplemented these staples. This diet provided essential calories and nutrients to sustain energy levels in extreme cold, although it was low in certain vitamins. The preservation of food reduced spoilage and ensured a reliable supply, directly influencing physical health and survival rates. During months when outdoor foraging was impossible, clothing and bedding practices had direct impacts on health. Layered wool, linen, and fur garments insulated against cold, preventing hypothermia and frostbite. Bedding raised above cold floors and layered with straw or furs minimized heat loss during sleep. Vikings adapted their clothing for both work and rest, understanding that maintaining body temperature was critical for maintaining immunity and overall well-being. Proper layering, combined with vigilant attention to moisture control, helped prevent respiratory illnesses common in cold, damp conditions. Exercise and labor were integral to daily life, indirectly supporting health. Wood chopping, animal care, and food preparation kept individuals physically active, maintaining strength and circulation. Even limited movement was crucial during winter months when extended indoor confinement could otherwise lead to stiffness, lethargy, or circulatory issues. These physically demanding routines were not only necessary for survival tasks, but also supported cardiovascular and musculoskeletal health, mitigating the physiological effects of prolonged cold. Hygiene practices were crucial despite environmental challenges. Families maintained cleanliness within the longhouse, ensuring that cooking areas, sleeping platforms, and common spaces were regularly aired and swept. Water availability was seasonal and limited, so washing routines were adapted to conserve warmth while preventing the spread of pathogens. Even small actions, drying clothing thoroughly, airing furs, and maintaining clean bedding reduced the risk of skin infections, respiratory illness, and other health issues, illustrating the practical integration of hygiene into lifestyle. Medical knowledge, though rudimentary, played a role in coping with winter health risks. Communities utilized herbal remedies for minor ailments such as colds, digestive issues, or wounds. Knowledge of which plants or preparations could reduce inflammation, combat infection, or soothe discomfort was passed through families, often combined with practical care such as rest and nutrition. While these treatments could not cure every illness, they supported recovery and minimized complications. Contributing to the overall health of the population, sleep routines were adapted to environmental conditions. During the Arctic winter, daylight was minimal and the circadian rhythm could be disrupted. Vikings structured their daily schedules around light availability, combining physical work with rest periods to maintain alertness and conserve energy. Sleep areas were insulated and communal sleeping arrangements allowed for shared warmth, reducing the risk of hypothermia during prolonged nighttime periods. These lifestyle adaptations were subtle but essential for maintaining cognitive function and physical endurance. Mental and emotional health was also influenced by daily practices. The long, dark winters could be psychologically challenging, but structured routines, social interactions, storytelling, and communal meals provided stability and morale. Rituals and cultural activities offered both distraction and meaning, reducing stress and anxiety that could otherwise compromise physical health. Maintaining mental resilience was inseparable from overall survival, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of the link between emotional and physical well-being. Management of injuries and chronic conditions was part of everyday life. The harsh environment meant that falls, cuts, and frostbite were common. Communities developed practices for immediate treatment, such as cleaning wounds, applying herbal poultices, and immobilizing injuries. Even minor innovations, such as raising sleeping platforms or insulating work areas, indirectly reduced the frequency of accidents, highlighting the interaction between environmental adaptation and health outcomes. Pregnancy, childbirth, and child-rearing practices were tailored to Arctic conditions. Infants and children required extra protection from cold and careful nutrition to survive. Swaddling, layering, and strategic positioning near heat sources minimized exposure, while mothers' diets and communal support ensured adequate care. These practices reflected an understanding of vulnerability within the population and the necessity of maintaining generational health for long-term survival. Finally, the integration of lifestyle practices with environmental knowledge reinforced overall resilience. Vikings timed labor, meal preparation, and resource management to match seasonal and daily patterns, reducing exposure to hazards and ensuring consistent care of body and mind. By combining practical knowledge, communal effort, and routine structure, They maintained both physical and mental health despite the constraints imposed by extreme Arctic winters and the absence of indoor fireplaces. In conclusion, the health and lifestyle of Arctic Vikings were closely intertwined with their survival strategies. Nutrition, clothing, hygiene, physical activity, medical knowledge, sleep patterns, and mental resilience formed a comprehensive system of adaptation. By embedding health practices into daily routines and cultural norms, Viking communities ensured the well-being of individuals and the collective, enabling them to endure months of cold, darkness, and scarcity with remarkable endurance and efficiency. The survival strategies developed by Vikings living in Arctic regions had profound effects on subsequent generations, shaping not only the way people endured harsh winters but also influencing cultural practices, technological innovation, and community organization for centuries. The lessons embedded in architecture, social structure, and daily routines were transmitted both through direct instruction within families and through broader cultural traditions, ensuring that knowledge gained under extreme conditions became part of the collective wisdom of future societies. One clear impact was the architectural legacy of insulated longhouses. The techniques perfected to retain heat during months of sub-zero temperatures, layered walls of timber, wattle and daub, and turf, along with central hearths and ventilated roof openings, were refined over generations and influenced building practices in later Nordic communities. These principles of insulation, spatial planning, and heat management were foundational for later constructions in colder climates, demonstrating how survival-driven design innovations persisted beyond their original context. Generations who inherited these building techniques were better prepared to construct durable, efficient homes adapted to severe winters. Food preservation and storage methods also left a lasting imprint. Practices such as drying, smoking, fermenting, and salting became deeply embedded in Viking culture and continued in northern European societies long after the decline of the Viking Age. Knowledge of root cellars and insulated storage pits ensured that subsequent communities could maintain stable food supplies during winter, reducing the risk of famine and promoting population growth. These culinary and preservation techniques became standard in northern regions, highlighting how survival-driven innovations created enduring cultural norms. The management of livestock within or adjacent to living spaces likewise influenced future agricultural practices. Vikings' understanding of animal contribution to both nutrition and warmth informed subsequent Nordic and Arctic farming methods, integrating animals into daily routines, providing fodder during winter, and using communal labor to ensure herd survival became lessons passed down to successive generations, shaping livestock management strategies that were essential for survival in colder climates. Social organization, community cohesion, and cooperative labor practices also had lasting effects. The importance of sharing resources, coordinating tasks, and maintaining inter-household networks became a defining feature of northern societies. These social strategies, initially developed to manage extreme winter conditions, were institutionalized in communal norms and legal frameworks, influencing governance, dispute resolution, and collective work in later centuries. The emphasis on communal support as a survival tool strengthened cultural cohesion and laid the groundwork for resilient, interdependent communities. Clothing, textile, and tool innovations similarly impacted subsequent generations. Techniques for spinning, weaving, felting, and layering garments informed later textile practices, while durable, multi-purpose iron tools set standards for efficiency and longevity in domestic and agricultural life. These innovations, born of necessity in extreme environments, demonstrated a direct link between environmental adaptation and technological advancement. The knowledge and skills associated with crafting insulated clothing, managing fires efficiently, and using durable tools were transmitted across generations, providing a foundation for future survival strategies. Cultural beliefs and rituals, developed under Arctic conditions, continued to influence later societies as well. Storytelling, seasonal observances, and ritualized labor reinforced social cohesion and facilitated knowledge transfer. By embedding survival strategies within cultural frameworks, Vikings ensured that practical knowledge about resource management, environmental awareness, and communal support was passed along alongside moral and social values. Subsequent generations inherited not only the technical knowledge necessary to survive, but also the cultural systems that encourage cooperation, discipline, and resilience. The Viking emphasis on observation and environmental awareness left a cognitive legacy. Knowledge of weather patterns, seasonal cycles, and local geography became an integral part of Northern European survival skills. Communities learned to anticipate challenges, allocate resources efficiently, and adapt routines proactively. These observational skills, rooted in the necessity of enduring Arctic winters, contributed to broader patterns of ecological literacy and practical intelligence in future generations. Health and lifestyle lessons also persisted. Knowledge about nutrition, layered clothing, hygiene practices, and remedies for cold-related injuries informed subsequent approaches to winter survival. By institutionalizing effective routines and teaching them to younger members of the community, Vikings established patterns of resilience that could be applied to future generations facing similar environmental stressors. Mental resilience, reinforced through rituals, storytelling, and communal practices, was similarly transmitted, ensuring that psychological preparedness accompanied practical skills. Finally, the cumulative effect of these survival strategies shaped the broader cultural identity of Northern European societies. The capacity to endure long, dark winters without modern heating became a marker of resilience, ingenuity, and communal cooperation. These traits were celebrated in oral histories, sagas, and cultural memory, influencing societal values and shaping the self-perception of communities long after the original Viking settlements had evolved. Future generations not only benefited from practical innovations, but also inherited a cultural ethos that emphasized adaptability, perseverance, and resourcefulness. In summary, the impact of Arctic Viking survival strategies on future generations was profound and multifaceted. Architectural design, food preservation, livestock management, social cohesion, clothing and tool innovations, cultural rituals, environmental awareness, and health practices all contributed to a legacy of resilience. Knowledge and skills were passed down both practically and culturally, ensuring that subsequent populations were better equipped to withstand harsh climates. The enduring lessons of the Viking approach to winter survival demonstrate how human ingenuity, cultural transmission, and adaptation to extreme conditions can influence generations long after the initial challenges have been overcome. The study of how Vikings survived long Arctic winters offers valuable lessons that remain relevant for modern audiences. While we live with the convenience of central heating, modern transportation, and abundant food supply, the principles underpinning Viking survival, adaptation, resourcefulness, and community cohesion provide insight into human resilience and ingenuity. By examining their strategies, contemporary viewers can appreciate how environmental pressures shape behavior, culture, and technological advancement, while gaining practical lessons in planning, sustainability, and cooperation. One of the clearest takeaways is the importance of preparation and foresight. Vikings meticulously prepared for winter months, storing food, insulating homes, and maintaining clothing and tools. Modern parallels can be drawn in emergency preparedness, sustainable living, and resource management. By studying Viking practices, audiences are reminded of the value of planning ahead, anticipating challenges, and ensuring that essential needs, food, shelter, and warmth are addressed before crises arise. Strategic foresight remains a timeless principle of survival and effective problem-solving. Another key lesson is the value of environmental adaptation. Vikings observed local geography, climate, and seasonal patterns to optimize their daily routines, shelter construction, and resource use. Their approach demonstrates the benefits of working with the environment rather than against it. Modern societies can learn from this mindset by designing solutions that respect natural conditions. From energy-efficient homes to sustainable farming and resource management, adaptation, informed by observation and experience, emerges as a critical component of long-term resilience, resourcefulness, and efficiency also stand out. Vikings had limited fuel, harsh winters, and scarce food supplies. Yet they maximized their available resources through insulation, layered clothing, food, preservation, and livestock management. Every tool, garment, and structure was designed for multifunctional use and durability. This approach emphasizes the importance of efficiency, frugality, and thoughtful design concepts that are increasingly relevant today, particularly in contexts of sustainability, climate adaptation, and minimizing waste. Social cohesion and cooperative effort emerge as another enduring lesson. Vikings relied on communal labor, shared knowledge, and coordinated routines to survive Arctic winters. Individual survival was inseparable from collective effort. Maintaining social bonds and adhering to shared responsibilities were essential. Modern audiences can apply this principle in team dynamics, community planning, and collaborative problem-solving, recognizing that shared challenges are often best met through cooperation and mutual support. The Vikings' approach to health and lifestyle offers additional insights. They maintained warmth, nutrition, hygiene, and physical activity, integrating these factors into structured daily routines. Mental resilience was reinforced through cultural rituals, storytelling, and social cohesion. This holistic view of health where physical, mental, and social well-being are interconnected remains a valuable lesson for contemporary audiences, reminding us that well-being in extreme or challenging conditions requires both practical measures and psychological support. Cultural continuity and knowledge transmission provide another takeaway. The Vikings embedded practical survival knowledge within cultural practices, rituals, and oral traditions. Skills, techniques, and lessons were passed from elders to younger generations, ensuring that essential knowledge endured over time. Modern audiences can learn from this emphasis on education, mentorship, and structured knowledge sharing. Recognizing the value of intergenerational learning and the preservation of practical wisdom, the Viking example also highlights innovation under constraint. Their survival depended on creative solutions, such as insulated storage pits, layered clothing systems, and multifunctional tools. These innovations arose from necessity and illustrate how limitations can drive ingenuity. Modern viewers can apply this lesson to problem-solving in fields ranging from engineering and technology to community planning and resource management. Understanding that constraints often foster innovative thinking, their resilience in the face of adversity underscores the role of mindset in survival. Vikings faced months of darkness, extreme cold, and scarce resources, yet cultural norms, communal effort, and practical strategies enabled them to endure. Their approach demonstrates that mental preparedness, adaptability, and disciplined routines are as critical as material resources. Modern audiences can draw inspiration from this resilience, recognizing that challenges, whether environmental, social, or personal, can be mitigated through planning, cooperation, and psychological fortitude. In conclusion, the lessons of Viking survival extend beyond historical curiosity. They emphasize preparation, environmental adaptation, resource efficiency, social cohesion, holistic health, knowledge transmission, innovation under constraint, and resilience. By studying how communities endured harsh Arctic winters without modern conveniences, contemporary audiences gain practical insights into problem-solving, sustainability, and communal living. These lessons remind us that human ingenuity, adaptability, and cooperative effort remain timeless tools for overcoming adversity, regardless of the era or environment. As the narrative of Arctic Viking survival draws to a close, the audience is left with an image that encapsulates both the harshness of the environment and the resilience of the people who endured it. Imagine a snow-covered fjord at twilight, the low winter sun casting long shadows across frozen landscapes. Thick snow blankets the ground, while distant mountain peaks glint with icy brilliance. Against this stark backdrop, a cluster of longhouses stands, their turf roofs dusted with snow. Smoke from small, carefully managed hearths rises gently into The still air, the faint warmth visible only in the soft golden glow from the doorway openings. This image conveys both isolation and survival, emphasizing the delicate balance Vikings maintained between themselves and their environment. In the foreground, figures move deliberately around the longhouse courtyard, performing necessary routines. Despite the biting cold, children, bundled in layered furs, assist with carrying firewood, while adults tend to livestock or inspect stored food. Their movements are purposeful, practiced, and synchronized, reflecting a deep familiarity with the demands of winter. Every action, from feeding animals to maintaining fire pits, is a survival imperative, demonstrating the integration of culture, labor, and environmental adaptation. The scene conveys a quiet, disciplined resilience rather than dramatic heroism, highlighting the practical and communal strategies that defined Viking winter life. The visual shifts subtly to emphasize contrast. The surrounding wilderness is empty and formidable, dominated by towering evergreens and glaciers, emphasizing the Vikings' small but resilient presence within the vast Arctic expanse. Here, the environment itself becomes a silent character, shaping behavior, dictating routines, and testing endurance. Snowdrifts accumulate around shelter entrances, winds carve patterns into the frozen ground, and daylight is fleeting. This setting reinforces the central lesson that survival depends on understanding and working with the natural world rather than attempting to dominate it. A principle as relevant today as it was a millennium ago. Within this frozen tableau, subtle signs of human ingenuity are apparent. Smoke rises only where it is carefully tended, preserving heat without excessive fuel use. Insulated storage pits peek from beneath snowdrifts, hinting at the long-term planning essential for survival. Layered clothing, furs, and well-maintained tools reflect a deep knowledge of materials and their properties. These details collectively illustrate that enduring harsh winters required foresight, technical skill, and disciplined daily routines. The scene allows viewers to appreciate the quiet complexity behind seemingly simple survival practices. Emotionally, the visual conveys calm determination and communal interdependence. Vikings are not depicted as heroes battling nature, but as individuals embedded within a structured social system, cooperating and relying on shared knowledge. The long shadows and muted light enhance the contemplative mood, inviting viewers to reflect on human adaptability, the passage of time, and the interplay between people and environment. The winter landscape, while beautiful, is unforgiving, emphasizing the stakes and highlighting the significance of every survival strategy employed. To leave the audience with a thought-provoking moment, consider a lone figure pausing at the edge of a frozen river. They glance toward the horizon, surveying the icy expanse, perhaps reflecting on the long months ahead. The figure's breath forms clouds in the crisp air, a small, human-scale indicator of life persisting within a formidable environment. This image encapsulates the tension between vulnerability and resilience, inviting reflection on the choices, innovations, and cultural practices that allowed the Vikings to endure. It subtly prompts viewers to consider how much of modern comfort and safety relies on knowledge accumulated across generations, often in response to extreme challenges. Finally, the closing moment emphasizes continuity and legacy. The longhouses, livestock, stored provisions, and meticulously maintained routines suggest that these communities were not temporary settlements but well-planned, enduring systems. The viewer is left with an awareness that the lessons of adaptation, cooperation, and resilience were passed down, influencing later societies and still resonating in contemporary approaches to survival and community management. The Arctic landscape, unchanged over centuries, stands as a testament to both human ingenuity and the enduring challenge of nature, leaving the audience with a lasting impression of balance, perseverance, and interconnectedness. In essence, the closing visual serves as both a summary and a meditation. It merges environmental grandeur with human resilience, practical ingenuity with communal values, and historical observation with reflective engagement. By focusing on the ordinary, disciplined, and interdependent aspects of Viking winter life, The audience is invited to appreciate the subtle complexities of survival in extreme conditions. The frozen fjord, the quiet longhouses, and the determined figures together leave a lasting image, a human story of adaptation, endurance, and legacy, set against the vast and uncompromising Arctic winter. Discover how Vikings endured some of the harshest Arctic winters without modern heating or indoor fireplaces. This documentary explores their ingenious survival strategies, including layered clothing, preserved foods, and insulated longhouses. Learn how communal labor, environmental awareness, and cultural rituals help them thrive in extreme cold. From daily routines to livestock management, every aspect of Viking life contributed to their resilience. Explore the mental and physical adaptations that ensured survival across generations. Archaeological findings and historical records provide insight into their remarkable resourcefulness. This video is perfect for history enthusiasts, students, and anyone interested in human endurance. Witness how ancient practices shaped future Nordic societies and inspired survival knowledge that resonates even today.